When Kawhi Leonard was drafted 15th overall in the 2011 draft by the Indiana Pacers, coming out of San Diego State after his sophomore season, not much was talked about his future potential or the prospect of him being a potential franchise player. Otherwise, he would have gone much earlier in that draft instead of being just outside of the lottery. A player who, yes, was viewed to be a very talented two-way player with proper development, but nothing like the player he would ultimately become. No one thought he would be a top 5 player in the NBA, go on to be a perennial all-star, multiple All-NBA selections, multiple Defensive Player of the Year awards, championships, finals MVPs, you name it. To go from that to not even being a top 40 recruit coming out of high school to one of the best players the game has seen has been quite the story, to say the least. But despite all the accolades and accomplishments, there is a problem with Kawhi Leonard that most people are overlooking, particularly the LA Clippers, and likely could mean the end of Kawhi Leonard we once knew as one of the most dominant players in the NBA. If you're new to the channel and you enjoy the content, feel free to subscribe, as this is a newly created channel and I would very much appreciate it. Now, when Kawhi Leonard hit that game-winning shot in Game 7 that bounced around on the rim before ending the Sixers' dreams of finally making it out of the East, and after he subsequently led the Toronto Raptors to their first title in franchise history in 2019, it was believed by most in the league that Kawhi Leonard was becoming the new face of the NBA. The fact that he was able to take a team that year after year could not get out of the Eastern Conference and win a title the very season that he arrived was monumental. Sure, by that time LeBron James was no longer in the East, who more or less was the sole reason why the Raptors could not advance whenever they faced the Cavaliers, and sure, the outcome in the finals might have been different had Kevin Durant and Klay Thompson not gotten injured for the Warriors in that 2019 finals. But the fact remains, Kawhi Leonard, who for some felt he wasn't going to be the same player if he wasn't playing under Greg Popovich and coming off an injury where he held the Spurs hostage until they ultimately traded him, to then coming to Toronto and winning a championship without the star veteran cast around him in his first title that he had in San Antonio, put him in a new tier in the NBA among the league's elite. Of course, as most predicted, Kawhi Leonard left the Raptors after his lone season with the team as a one-year rental, well worth it for the Raptors, and Kawhi signed with his hometown in Los Angeles for the Clippers, even though he held the Lakers in a bit of a limbo, thinking they had a shot at him, and held off on signing other free agents until he made his decision. And Kawhi picked up right where he left off, playing at an elite level as one of the best players in the league, putting up insane numbers on insane efficiency with top 5 offensive and defensive ratings in the league. There were arguments being made that Kawhi Leonard was now the best player in the NBA with how dominant and gifted he was on both ends of the floor. And in the 2020-21 season, the Clippers were poised to contend for a title with one of the best preseason championship odds in the league, with a stacked team, 2 superstars in Paul George and Kawhi Leonard himself. And despite having an up and down season, obviously this was the season that was shortened due to coming back from the pandemic, but the Clippers still managed to go 45-27, finishing 4th in the West. They beat the Mavs in 7 games in a hard-fought first-round series, and in the second round, going up against the Jazz, with the series tied 2-2, Kawhi gets injured with an ACL injury, but despite Kawhi getting injured and effectively would not be returning for the season, the Clippers somehow exposed the number 1 seeded Jazz and took them out in 2 games, and then they even put up a good fight in the conference finals against the Phoenix Suns without Kawhi Leonard. But in here lies the problem with Kawhi. He obviously did not return at all the following season, despite the fact that there were hopes he could make a return at the end of the year. The Clippers ended up missing the playoffs, getting knocked out of the play-in. And then, going into this season, the hype was back. Clippers, again, being one of the title favorites with high odds to win it all, a preseason over and under of 52.5 games, because the assumption was Paul George was going to be coming back fully healthy after he missed a good portion of the season last year. And then, of course, Kawhi Leonard, after being out for over 16 months, which is a pretty long recovery time for an ACL injury, the thought was it was more than enough time for Kawhi to be fully ready to go by the start of the season. Until he wasn't. Right off to start the season, it was announced that Kawhi would be sitting out in back-to-backs due to injury management, which was somehow becoming a new thing this year, different from load management in that you are managing a player's time on the court to prevent future injuries coming off a previous injury. Kawhi plays 2 of the Clippers' first 3 games of the season on a minutes restriction coming off the bench, and then misses the subsequent 11 games to manage that knee as he was experiencing some pain with no estimated timeline for return. He finally returns to play, plays 3 straight games, all on minutes restrictions, not playing more than 25 minutes in each of the games, and then he tweaks his ankle in the 3rd game back. He eventually gets ruled out for the following game because of the sprained ankle, and now the Clippers have announced there is no timetable for his return from a sprained ankle. Thus, Kawhi so far this season has played in 5 of the Clippers' 20 games, no timetable for return. The Clippers and Kawhi have both said this is going to be a long journey on his road to recovery, how they knew going into this season that it was going to be a slow process to get him back to being 100%. But here's the thing, if Kawhi Leonard is still struggling to get back to being fully healthy after being out for over 16 months from the time of his initial injury, mind you, this isn't the only injury that he's ever had. He had some major injuries also playing with the Spurs, and if the Clippers are taking this slow and steady approach of getting Kawhi back to health and also being very vague about his timelines for returning to full health, where he'll actually be able to play a full NBA game without a minutes restriction, then something tells me there is more going on within the organization than what they're actually letting on to, whether it be the Clippers being overly cautious about how quickly to start ramping him up, given that he's one of their biggest investments, signing him to a max extension through 2025 where he'll be making near $50 million a year by that time, or if it's Kawhi himself, because he's done this before, is more or less holding this team hostage, saying, I'm not going to play until I feel fully ready to go. And look, the Clippers don't have time to just waste another season with Kawhi and Paul George barely playing. Kawhi is 31 years old, Paul George 32. The window for this team to win is now. You don't have the luxury of just taking it easy with Kawhi's return and having him miss near half a season and just running it back next year in the hopes that he's fully healthy by then. The guy's prime is being wasted. It's not like he's in his early 20s. And look, it's not like Kawhi has been the embodiment of good health and longevity throughout his career. Having this be another wash season while you nurse Kawhi back to full health and hope for a title run next season, that might not even work with how often he gets injured. Like, as much as people want to get on Anthony Davis's case about never being available to play, Kawhi Leonard has played 541 regular season games over the course of his career. Anthony Davis has played 619, and Kawhi was drafted a year before Anthony Davis was. Kawhi has missed significantly more available games than Anthony Davis has over the course of both of their careers. And yet no one talks about Kawhi Leonard and his lack of availability, or at least they are nowhere near as critical as they are with Anthony Davis. The other thing is, in the small sample size that we have seen from Kawhi in his play this season, the 5 games that he's played, he doesn't at all look like the superstar Kawhi Leonard we saw before he got injured, which sure, you expect a little rust after being out for so long, and again, he's on a minutes restriction, but he doesn't have the quickness in that first step in getting to the basket. He doesn't have the same lateral quickness on the defensive end. His jump shot doesn't seem to have the same release as it did before. His outside shooting has been really bad. His efficiency in general is way down, a PER of 14 compared to his career average of 23. He just hasn't been the impactful player that we once saw Kawhi Leonard be, a guy who again was a superstar, a top 5 player in the league, a guy who, if you had him on your roster, you knew that you were a title contending team by virtue of just how skilled he was. And now the man simply looks like a shell of himself. Again, I know it's a small sample size. I know it's incredibly unfair to judge a player who is coming off a major injury and has only played 5 games since coming back from said injury. Yes, Kawhi could very well turn it around and be the superstar level player, the best two-way player in the league we once knew. But there's something to be said about a guy who is now in his 30s, with his injury history, with the amount of time spent off the court to get his rhythm and flow back, to fully be able to return to form at this point in his career. And I think part of the Clippers organization and Kawhi know this, and is why they are being abundantly cautious with his playing time in the small hope of him getting back to an MVP caliber type player, with their vagueness for how they are approaching his rehab and recovery. And at his age, I think most people are seeing the writing on the wall that this likely is the end of Kawhi Leonard as we once knew him, which also means the dreams and hopes of the Clippers finally winning their first championship as a franchise are dashed once again after moving heaven and earth to be able to acquire both Kawhi and Paul George and mortgaging their future as a result of it. Again, I'm fully aware it is way too early to be making this type of claim, but I would not be shocked if by the end of the season, the Clippers look to blow up their roster and start rebuilding, even if it means moving on from Kawhi and Paul George when their trade values are even at an all-time low. Let me know what you guys think. Do you think the best days of Kawhi Leonard are behind him? Let me know in the comments. Be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.